Hello and welcome to another episode of Meteor Tales. Today I will be discussing dice and attributes, okay, and how they function in the game. In Meteor Tales, we have only 3 dice. We have D20, D12, and the D10. It's the only dice you will ever need. Now, these dice represent your character's performance, okay, across all aspects of your character, even if that is combat or skill checks or anything related. And they also connect with your attributes. So, as we have said before, each character has a certain amount of grit points. It's the equivalent of hit points, but it covers more. Grit represents a character's health, stamina, morale, and is also affected by the environment and other factors. So, grit is your god now. As long as you're healthy and well, you use a d20 for everything you do. If that is an attack, a spell, a skill, anything you do, you use a d20, okay? If you are wounded or you are in some sort of disadvantage, you use a d12, and if things get very bad for you, you use a d10. So the dice change according to your performance, okay? We don't have modifiers, not in the sense that most games have. It is the only way to measure advantage and disadvantage, okay? So I have here a character. This is a Medi Archer I made. You can take a look at the character sheet, okay? You can take a look at the 4 basic attributes: threat, mobility, vigor, and perception. Notice that each attribute has 3 different stages, okay? These shift according to your grit. So normally by default, what you do is that you always look at the left side, the left column of the attributes, okay? So by default, you look at the d20 side of the attributes. This means that when you are on your prime grit, okay, these are the numbers that correspond to your performance. So my threat is medium, so I look at the 20 value, okay, my mobility is medium, that means 8 tiles I can move. My vigor is low, that means even in my prime grit, my vigor is 8, and my perception is exceptional, which means by default I can see and shoot targets at 14 tiles distance. Okay, this is an overview of my attributes. So far, so good. So, this means that if I want to attack a target, okay, I roll a d20. So far, I'm in my normal grit, and I roll a d20. Okay, let's say I roll a 6. That would mean 6 points of damage to any of these targets, okay? When you roll the die, there are only 2 factors that you need to consider: risk and critical, okay? Risk is a default chance of critical failure. So this is determined by the weapon you use, okay? So the longbow, as you can see in the character sheet, here in the combat section, has a default weapon risk of 2. This means that if I roll 1 or 2 in the d20 or any die, I lose my action and I drop to my lowest possible performance for the round. It's a temporary thing. So I rolled a 6, which means I'm okay. If I rolled a 1 or 2, I would lose my action, and if I did a second action, I would use a d10 die, okay? Automatically, all my attributes would shift to the right column, the d10 column, okay? My mobility would be lower for the round, my vigor, my perception, and my threat. Okay, so the attributes are dynamic. This means that I'm ineffective, I stumbled, okay, and I now have to face the consequences. So this is how risk affects your character, okay. If you perform a powerful maneuver, this chance gets higher, okay. For example, I have here a maneuver called scissor shot. So, scissor shot allows you to attack two characters at the same time in a cone radius, okay? But it counters your attack with a +3 risk. So, the way to calculate this is you take weapon risk, which is 2, and add 3 points. That makes it a 5, which means if I roll anywhere between 1 and 5, I fail the same way as I did before with 1 or 2, okay? So you get a higher chance of becoming vulnerable as a character when you use these high tier maneuvers. So that said, if I do fail and then I drop to the lowest die, when you roll into risk, you drop to the lowest die possible. You don't go one stage down, you go very low, okay? You get the same chances of risk but in a smaller die. So that would be, a normal attack would be 1 or 2 on a d10, and the scissor shot would be 1 or 5 on a d10, 1 to 5, okay? So if you drop to the lowest die, there's a very high chance you cannot do anything sophisticated. That was risk. Let's go and see how critical is measured. Okay, let's say I'm back to my default d20 and I roll an attack. Okay, as you can see in the character sheet, my critical range is 17, 11, and 10. This represents again 3 dice. This means that when I use a d20, if I roll a 17 or higher, I do a critical attack. If I use a d12, an 11 or higher is a critical attack, and if I use a d10, a 10 is a critical attack. This means that you get a critical chance across all dice. Good weapons will do that. Some weapons will not do that, okay? So even if I'm at my lowest performance, I can still score a critical hit, which of course will be compromised, okay? So let's say I use the 20. If I roll a 17, automatically I have a critical attack. Therefore, I will add my threat value. So if you check the character sheet, okay, your threat value represents the extra damage you deal with physical attacks. So my 17, I add the 20 value I have, okay, and my final damage is 37 points of damage. That is a lot of damage if you consider that each character has an average of 50 grit, okay? So if this guy here suffers 37 points of damage and he now has 13 grit points left, this means that he is below prime grit. He's in the reduced category, and by default he uses a d12 die, okay? So his performance is affected, and he's not in the worst case scenario, but in somewhere in the middle, okay? Anywhere between 50 and 21 points of grit, you are on prime grit d20. Below that, you are in the d12, and anywhere between 10 or lower grit, you are in the d10, the worst case scenario, okay? This means that if this character had 8 tiles of movement, he can now only do half of that, okay? So, this is how you connect your attributes with dice. Moving on, we have to explain the different kind of dice, okay? In the game, you will see many events that will require different sort of dice, okay? When you use your main die, we call this the core die, okay? This means that it factors in risk and critical factors, okay? If some sort of maneuver, spell, or other sort of advantage gives you a bonus die, let's say the maneuver states you roll a d20 and a d10 at the same time, you roll both of them, okay? Let's say you roll a 9 and a 5. The bonus die amounts to the total attack roll, okay? So this is a 14 in total, but does not factor in critical, or it does not affect risk or even critical. So it doesn't matter if you get a critical chance with the dice combined. You need to factor in only this die for risk and critical, the bad and the good, okay? So the bonus die only amounts to the total score, okay? This is what we call a core die and a bonus die, okay? And it doesn't matter if it's 1 or 2 or 3 bonus dice. So we have another type of die is the active die, okay? So if there's an active effect going on, okay, you use the active dice, which means that if this character is some sort of spellcaster, okay, and he has an active effect, a spell that is an armor surrounding him, which means that every attack he receives, there is a chance, automatically, without spending an action or a reaction, that the armor will repel that attack. Okay, this means that every time this guy suffers an attack, either melee or ranged, an automatic die is rolled, okay? This die reflects the performance of the character. It can be a d20, a d12, or a d10 according to his status, but it is an active die, which means it factors in critical effects but not risk, okay? So if my active spell rolls a 1, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It might fail to repel the attack, but it will not cause me any further problems. That is an active die. Okay? Finally, we have the mixed dice. Okay? Mixed dice, you roll them when for some reason an attack may be compromised by for one target but not for another. Okay, very common example. I have the maneuver I told you about, the scissor shot, okay, and I hit 2 targets. If this target uses his shield to guard himself, okay, he lowers my attack by 1 die, which means I use dynamically the d12 for this guy, without meaning that I have some sort of problem or disadvantage by default. It's just a maneuver he has that he drops me to the d12. But this guy doesn't have some sort of advantage, okay? In this scenario, I would have to use 2 dice at the same time, a d20 and a d12. And I roll both of them at the same time. But, again, only the main die, the d20, factors in critical chances. Okay? So, if I roll a 1 on the d20, it doesn't matter what I roll here. It's a failure. Okay? My main die is a 1. However, like in the active die, okay, you can score a critical with a d12. If I score a critical with a d12, I will not add my 20 points of threat damage. I will add my 10, because this is what corresponds to the d12 die. If you take a look at the character sheet, okay, that's why the dice are there. So each grid status corresponds to a different stage of your attribute, okay, which means that my character who has a medium threat, he can add 20 points of damage in his prime grid, 10 points of damage in his reduced grid, but no further damage in his low grid. And that's how dice work in Meteor Tales, and that's how they connect to your attributes. Same thing with your perception, which I use for my range attacks. Okay, I have a 14 range when I'm at prime grid. Okay, I can shoot 14 tiles away, but reduced is 12 and frail is 10. Okay, so my range is compromised either temporarily or for longer periods of time. And my final point, risk is affected by many factors. Okay, first of all, the maneuvers you use, the more powerful they are. Okay, but other factors can affect your risk. For example, let's say weather. Okay, a stormy weather, for example, may add a +3 risk to anything you do, which means by default all characters involved affected by the storm get a +3 risk every time they perform any sort of action. Okay, because of the rain, because it's slippery, because of high winds and everything. So you factor in weather factors. These weather factors can also affect your attributes. Okay, you can say there are guides for this in the book, but you can also as a game master, you can also adjust it if you want. Okay, you can say that snow or frost only affects your mobility. Okay, so if it's snowing in here and it's frosty terrain, you can say that all characters have a reduced mobility. By default, that's it. You cannot move very fast. Or if there's very high and strong winds in the area, you can say that, you know what, all archers, all range attacks suffer 1 grit level penalty, which means they roll the d12 regardless of how effective they are. Okay, regardless of their wounds, regardless of anything. So you have a dynamic system, okay, that takes place according to the environment. It affects your risk, your attributes, and therefore your dice. And that's it for today's video. That's all for today. If you liked what you saw, please like and subscribe. If you'd like to support the channel, check out the links in the description below. Don't forget to leave a comment and share your thoughts. I'd love to hear from you. See you all next time.